Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about emotionally disturbed disability, also known as ED. You'll hear me refer to it as ED and emotionally disturbed disability at different points throughout this PowerPoint, so it all means the same thing. The first thing we need to know about ED is that emotionally disturbed disability is really more of an umbrella term for a bunch of different anxiety disorders or bipolar disorders, anything really that has to do with your personality and your way of thinking. So other disorders under ED are anxiety disorder, bipolar, eating disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and conduct disorders. Having a disorder like this, of any of these, may follow these children or these students throughout life, which can make it hard for them to have meaningful relationships, friendships, and even a career. So what causes emotionally disturbed disability? There is no one cause. Because there's so many aspects of it, there could be a million different causes. There is some research on what most likely causes ED. Many believe factors like heredity, brain disorder, diet, stress, and family functioning can have an effect. Others say children are at a greater risk if they're exposed to violence, criminal behavior, if they have experienced maltreatment, harsh and inconsistent parenting, or even if the parents have mental health issues like substance abuse, depression, or even ADHD. This, of course, does not mean that every parent that has certain issues will have a child with emotionally disturbance disorders, but it is possible. Another theory is that children with ED may have been abandoned or physically, emotionally, or sexually abused at some point in their lives. So, right now we're going to break down each disorder that could fall under the umbrella term of ED. The first is anxiety disorders. So, some examples of anxiety disorders, there are many, are generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, which we'll get into, post-traumatic stress disorder, social anxiety disorder, also called social phobia, and specific phobias. Treatments for anxiety disorders usually include self-care, therapy, medications, and specialists that know how to deal with that specific disorder. The next disorder under ED is bipolar disorder. Bipolar is a medical condition that is in which there are dramatic mood swings from getting really, really high and busy and happy and inspired to really, really low and sad and hopeless and pretty much depressed. There are some points of normal mood, as they say, in between both mood swings, but you go back and forth a lot. Treatment for bipolar disorder, usually mood swings are stabilized with a mix of medication, but again, psychotherapy does help. Conduct disorder. So as you can see, conduct disorders are usually diagnosed in children and adolescents. This disorder is when children have difficulty following rules and behaving in ways that are socially acceptable. So some behaviors under conduct disorder are aggression to people and animals, destructing property, lying or stealing, truancy, and other serious rule violations. Treatments for conduct disorder are obviously based on the child's symptoms, their age, and their general health. But they usually include cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which teaches children how to better solve problems, better communicate, and better handle stress, impulses, and angers. There's also family therapy, peer group therapy, and not typically used, but there are medications that can help. The next is eating disorders. Eating disorders cause feelings of distress or concern about one's body shape or weight. These feelings can lead to either eating too much in a short period of time, like binge eating, or too little, like anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa. Throwing up, extreme exercise, and lying about food are more traits of eating disorders. Females are much more likely to get an eating disorder than males, as the reports show. But treatment for eating disorders is usually done as a team. It's usually a collaborative effort. Usually on the team, there is a psychological and nutritional counselor, along with a medical along with medical and psychiatric monitoring of that girl or boy. Next is obsessive compulsive disorder, which is also known as OCD. OCD is characterized by recurrent or unwanted thoughts, which are called obsessions, and or repetitive behaviors, which are compulsions. Repetitive behaviors could be hand washing, counting, knocking, checking, cleaning, any of these. Those are often performed with the hope of getting rid of the obsessive thoughts. So the repetitive behavior would be the compulsion. So performing these so-called rituals, like I mentioned before, don't usually actually get rid of the obsessive thoughts, but they do provide a temporary relief. The problem is that if they do not do the checks or the hand washing or whatever their compulsion may be, that it could very much increase the anxiety of that person. Scientific evidence shows that OCD is actually caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. So because of that, medication is used, especially antidepressant medication, but we also go through behavior therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy to help with those obsessions. Psychotic disorders. So psychotic disorders is another umbrella term used for mental disorders that cause abnormal thinking or perception. So the two main symptoms of psychotic disorders are delusions and hallucinations. Delusions are false beliefs, such as thinking that someone is coming to get you, plotting against you, anything like that. And hallucinations are false perceptions. So seeing something, hearing something, smelling something that's not actually there. One example, a common example of a psychotic disorder is schizophrenia. A lot of people know that one. And treatments for psychotic disorders always differ from person to person, again, based on the symptoms and the person themselves. And most treatments do include, again, medication and psychotherapy. The defining features of ED, going back. So the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, defines emotional disturbance as a condition exhibiting one or more of the following characteristics over a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects a child's educational performance. An inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. An inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers. Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances. A general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. And a tendency to develop physical symptoms of fears associated with personal or school problems. So some characteristics that may be included or behaviors under ED are hyperactivity, aggression, self-injury, withdrawal, immaturity, and learning difficulties. Children with the most serious emotional disturbances may exhibit distorted thinking, excessive anxiety, bizarre motor acts, and abnormal mood swings. So the incidence of ED is not so researched, if I have to say. About 6% of students with disabilities are classified as having an emotional disturbance nationally. In comparison, about 39% have a specific learning disability, such as dyslexia, and 17% have a speech and language impairment. So according to data from 2016-2017 school year, about 52% of students who have been labeled with emotional disturbance disorders are between the ages of 13 and 17, which is relatively young. So the manifestations in education. What does this mean for our students? So students with ED are at risk for school failure and could require specifically designed instruction and psychotherapy or counseling services. If there is no diagnosis of ED and people don't know what it is, students are more likely to be punished, pushed out of school, and due to expulsion or suspension. So before diagnosis, children with ED are considered bad kids, troublemakers, and that's, through peers, teachers, administrators, they're just labeled. And a label like that, especially going through adolescence at 13 to 17 years old, can severely affect the self-esteem of that student. These children not only feel shunned, but also must work through circumstances that lead to them becoming emotionally disturbed. So, in the 2016 to 2017 school year, fewer than half students in this disability category spent most of the day in general education classrooms. And while about 3% of students with disabilities overall were in separate schools, 13% of students with emotional disturbances were in separate schools. So what this means is that emotionally disturbed students are not really classified as having a disorder. They're more likely to be in generalized education classes. They're more likely to be labeled as troubled kids, as we said before. Students with disabilities in general and behavioral disabilities in particular are more likely than their peers in general education to be the victims and perpetrators of bullying. Students with emotional disturbances also face high rates of self-harm. 25% of long-term suspensions and expulsions are of students with emotional disturbances, though they represent a fraction of the special education population. So, the main question is, how can we help? So parents and caregivers should absolutely advocate for these students within their school and within their own community. But before we can do that, we need to tell them, we need to educate parents and administrators and teachers on what ED is and how we can even help them. So according to the IDEA, which we mentioned before, that the IDEA requires that special education and related services be made available free of charge to every eligible child with a disability, including preschoolers. Families often need help understanding their child's disability and how to address the needs that arise from that disability. So they should be able to get this screening completely free. In the 2016 school year, more than 394,000 children and youth with emotional disturbances received these services to address their individual needs related to emotional disturbance. So determining a child's eligibility for special education, or an IEP or a 504, or any related services, begins with an individual evaluation of the child. Under IDEA, this evaluation is provided free of charge in every public school. So other things that we can do are listed here. We can provide emotional and behavioral support, helping with academics, social self-control, self-esteem, all that. PBS, Positive Behavioral Support, is a new program in schools, and they would get points for doing good behaviors. So what that would do is the problem behaviors would be minimized and positive behaviors would be encouraged. We can consider IEPs, setting up an IEP, we could do counseling services, and the main problem is that more trained counselors are needed in schools and in communities to help screen for mental health disorders. The most important thing we have to remember in terms of treatment of children with ED is that each treatment plan needs to take the child's individual needs into consideration. There is no such thing that of one treatment fits all because of all that goes on within this disability. There's peers, there's teachers, there's emotional disturbances, there's educational disturbances. There's so much that can go on. So, to finish off, who mainly is affected by ED? The research on gender, race, and socioeconomic status in relation to ED is not complete. Some say that 51% of children with ED are white, but most say that Black students are represented at a higher percentage in this disability category than they are among students with disabilities overall. So, then what I found out that Black students were 7 times, and Native American and Latino students were 2 times more likely to receive exclusionary discipline. Black students and Native American students were 2 to 3 times more likely to be labeled as emotionally disturbed. So even though 51% of emotionally disturbed students are white, according to the research, there is a higher percentage of Black and Latino people, Latinx people, being diagnosed with ED or being suspended without even knowing that they had ED. Here are the references for the work I have found, and thank you very much.